Okay, today I'd like to talk about a alternative to the actual wet media painting process where you can actually work in a series of layers on a particular paper or some other kind of substrate that could be drawn on with dry media, and you can actually put the layer of dry media down followed by a wet media such as ink or acrylic medium or PVA. So for this particular piece, I've started with my photo reference and actually did the drawing with red pencil and graphite and charcoal on the surface, working from this particular reference right here, which actually came from one of my paintings. So I've cut it down. Every time that I work from a photo reference, I always work to scale of the size of the painting that I'm going to be doing. So it's going to be the same here. The drawing is the exact size of the reference. For this process, the methodology is to actually lay down a dry media just as you would do in a regular drawing. After this process, you would actually follow up, and for this case I'm going to follow up with PVA, but I'm probably going to switch to either GAC 800, which is a very thin transparent acrylic base, or I could actually just use a watered down gesso. This way the actual process could cover up some of the marks, and then eventually you can have some places covered and then some places shown. I'm pretty new to this, so I don't know how many layers this particular paper is going to actually withstand, but I'm guessing probably around 10 times that I can go in with dry media followed by wet media and dry media followed by wet media. So about the paper, I'm using heavyweight Reeves BFK printmaking paper, and the particular reason that I'm actually using this paper is because it has no binder in it, so it's going to allow that liquid to actually go into the paper. The second thing really has to do with the tooth. Instead of a pressed paper, because it's a rag paper, the tooth is very pitty, so it'll allow lots and lots of stuff to be pulled into the paper without having to worry about actually destroying the texture, because what's going to be important is that the dry media has to be able to be it has to have tooth on the paper and for that dry media. So if I keep adding acrylic medium, because of the plastic nature of acrylic medium, it gets kind of slippery, and no longer will I be able to draw on it. So that's kind of the one reason that I'm using BFK, but obviously you can use Arches oil paper, which is a similar type of paper to BFK. The difference probably has to do with the fact that it's pressed with PVA that actually prevents it from the oil for rotting the paper. So, but for this particular thing, I'm going to use BFK. Now remember, the PVA and the acrylic gel medium will actually protect the paper. So eventually this could just stay as kind of a wet dry media drawing / painting. It could also be a base eventually for a painting. So with the PVA and the acrylic gesso covering it, it will actually protect the paper. Some of the tools that I'm going to be using, aside from the papers that I'm going to be using, I'm actually using a piece of foam core here. Due to the lack of studio space, for drawing methods, I'm actually using a pasta table, and this is actually for making pierogies or pasta and things like that. So that's fine. I'm just putting it on top of a bed in our guest room. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to have this keep all of my tools in this container, and the reason is because this project is so unique that a lot of the tools that I'm going to be using, I'm only going to be using for this particular project. So in this case, I could just keep everything together so that when I want to do this again, I have all the stuff together. I have a kneaded eraser, of course, because it's a dry media process and a drawing process. Erasing is part of the project, so you have the ability to erase and to change things. Unlike painting, this is kind of a very, very slow method for people that are having trouble kind of working with the full wet media of oil paint or acrylic paint. You can actually slowly kind of build this up through something a little bit safer, such as drawing. And then once eventually you get into it, you can actually start to blend the wet into the paint and actually be blending the dry media together. So in a sense, you're slowly walking into wet media from a dry media perspective. I am going to use these, I guess they're just kind of foam brushes, and I'm going to use this to actually apply the wet media. In this case I'm going to start with PVA, but I'm not sure where I'm going to go, and it's small, so I can kind of slowly and lightly be able to kind of apply it to the actual surface. I have a sharpener here, and of course I always like to sharpen my pencils with a razor blade, but for this case, because I'm probably going to be sharpening so many pencils throughout the project, I'm just going to use this hand held small sharpener. And then of course I don't do a lot of drawing in my studio, so being able to keep the mess together in one place would be good. I have sandpaper. This is a very, very thin P400 sandpaper for car bodies, and this actually could be used to actually open up the texture on the paper periodically. But remember, anytime you're sanding paper, be careful, because you could completely sand a hole in the paper, or you could completely sand the integrity of the paper away. So, you know, when you're actually doing this, I'm using light sandpaper, and I'm not going to do it a lot. So don't take the sandpaper too much past like 10% of the surface of your paper. But once the gels and things like that start to get added to it, you might want to kind of scrape them down a little bit. So that would be used for that. Of course, always super sharp scissors. With BFK, you could actually use a tear bar to tear the paper. I used a razor blade to cut it. Eventually, I'm probably going to take this paper and attach it to a board, and then I'm going to be applying encaustic paint to it eventually. So I'll kind of have that for a different video at a different time. For the beginning of the drawing, I'm actually starting out with two tools. I'm using Indian ink marker, which is a Faber-Castell, and I'm going to use a graphite pencil. The reason I'm starting with graphite and not charcoal is because the graphite is going to stick better. So once I put that first layer of wet media down, it's not going to wipe away my drawing at the same time. I want to be able to kind of take that and just completely lock that drawing down, and then start to go into the piece without ever losing that initial drawing. Other tools that I'm going to be using, and I'm kind of playing around with some of the dry media tools at this time. I have a carbon charcoal blend pencil, which is a Wolf's Carbon 4B. I always like 4B. I have a few of those. This is actually an oil-based pencil, which is a Pitt, which is kind of cool because you can actually have an oil-based pencil and be mixing wet media into it, in a sense, kind of getting a type of dry media, wet media, oil paint in a sense. I'm going to use a white pencil, and I'm going to do a little bit of kind of eventually adding the white back into the piece like that, so that I'm almost blending the white and the black together, kind of like a grisaille. And then of course I have this graphitone. This is an aqua pencil. I have no idea what it is, but I'm going to try it and see how it works. I also have 3 brushes, and this will be for later in the project. These are obviously like 1 zeros and 1s that I'm going to use to actually blend the wet media and dry media together eventually. And then the last tool that I'm actually going to be using is these stumps for blending, and I don't like to use these particularly, but I think it might be useful for the project, so I bought a handful of these stumps, blending stumps. And then I have a basin here. So the cool thing about the basin is you can see that I actually have vine charcoal in here, and I could take that vine charcoal and crush it up and pour it into the piece. I could just draw with it if I wanted to. I can mix some of the liquid in here and actually create a type of charcoal paint. And then for the other basins, I could have one be PVA, one be acrylic gel, and one be water, one be alcohol. It's up to you, or paint thinner. So you have all of these different basins to actually work with. I'll probably only use one at a time, to be honest. But it is kind of cool that I could take the charcoal and blend it in with some of the liquid and do it that way. Miscellaneous tape. It's always important to use an artist grade tape, because on artist grade tape the adhesiveness is not strong enough to actually tear the paper. If you have a very strong tape, when you pull it up, it'll actually pull the paper with it. So I don't want that to happen. I just want the adhesiveness to just hold the paper down. I might actually remove this at some point. I might work a little bit on the table and then kind of work on the easel. It's hard to say how this is going to turn out. The last thing that I actually have is this, just a cloth, and the cloth could be used again like the eraser or like the stumps to actually just blend the process. I might be wanting to rub charcoal, vine charcoal into it to mask some of the shadow areas. I'm probably going to start out, so I went into this with the red pencil and the graphite. I'm probably going to come in with the Faber-Castell tool, and I'm probably going to quickly with the marker actually knock in some of the shadows. And then the next process will be coming in with the wet media, actually locking the drawing down. What I plan on doing is actually filming the process. I'm not going to talk too much about the process. I'll just kind of sum up some of the ideas and some of the things. I haven't really done this before, so I'm going to find out what's working and what's not working. I've reached out to a student to ask her, because she's actually used this before, and any kind of tips that I could pass along to you guys. The other thing that I would add is eventually you might want to add color. You could add colored inks. You could add watercolor, also an imprimatur of some kind of, if you wanted to start that way. Obviously I'm starting on white paper, and then I'll kind of start to tone it down from there. But as I'm filming, I'm going to kind of periodically stop and talk, but most of it is just going to be the physical process, and then my thoughts on it, summing those up. Okay, thank you. Setup. Right at this time I have my studio is being, not renovated, but I have an easel being built to fit in the area, so I'm actually working in our guest bedroom. But I wanted to show this because with this kind of particular space, I always hear people say that they don't have enough space to work. I'm working on a bed. Like I said, I'm using a pasta table, and I have my reference set up right here on mat board, and then behind it it's being held up by a paper towel and a camera box. And then of course I have everything here. I have the chair here. As you can see, it's a guest room as I'm right up against a bike. You could work wherever you want, but I just wanted to show the table. And like I said, I'm going to be kind of close up on this image, and I'm going to be working from it and then kind of talking in between. The one thing I did want to add is the fact that you could actually use watercolor pencils. Could be a great tool for the job as well, because they would actually blend. And with this process, it could just be a very, very slow wash process where you actually build up a lot of painterly form if you want to. For this, I'm going to stay black and white for the most part, except for the red pencil. But I don't know, maybe I might change my mind, and then eventually I might actually apply some oil paint to it. And then I wanted to do a close-up of the PVA. I can get that. Okay, so this is polyvinyl acetate, which is a basically just protects any surface from oil paint and water intrusion. And then this is the GAC 800. And then remember, if you go to the back, it will always tell you the information on it. And then of course I wanted this to be thinner, so I can't really get this focused, but it is rather transparent and almost as thin as you can actually get, so it's very water-like. A lot of times GAC 800 might be actually used for spray guns, so that, you know, the liquid can come out of the spray gun properly.